Oh, this is John Black, Super Chemist. Here to do one more video. Said I'd do one every day and ended up doing two, and then I stopped for 5 days, so I'm glad I got up to get off my butt to do this. I did want to bring up though, so this is my last slavery thing. I forgot to bring up the main thing, Civil War. So I'm going to do one more video here, hopefully just one. And then I'll go on to Pastafarian roles. Okay, so I haven't really talked about anything about Pastafarians that much. I mean, I have, but I haven't gone into detailed roles or anything like that. So I'm going to get into that in the next series called Pastafarian roles. So right now we're still at the playlist called racism, or slavery. But I did want to bring up that racism and slavery are two totally different things. I don't want anyone to think that, because I'm saying slavery is no big deal, that, that we shouldn't even, we should teach history, obviously, but we shouldn't act like it has anything to do with today. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that slavery wasn't bad a century and a half ago. Yes. Or actually more 160 years ago, and before that, yeah, it was bad, okay? I'm not saying it wasn't bad, it was bad, okay? And I'm not saying that racism isn't bad, it's bad too. I'm just saying that since slavery was so long ago, and it has nothing to do with today, that we should not be putting such emphasis on it, okay? We should teach it, but not be crazy about it and act like it really affects anything today. Racism affects stuff today, not slavery. Okay. So anyways, I wanted to really reiterate something I said in the last video, which was that, most of the population in the United States are descended from immigrants who came to the United States after slavery. So not only did they not have slaves, but they weren't even here during when it was legal to have a slave. So you can't count them, like that's half the country right there is obviously has nothing to do with slavery. But I want to reiterate it because it sounds like, oh, well, then the other half is guilty. Only half of them were here during Civil War times. No, that's not what I'm saying. Okay, not at all. Okay, you're missing the whole point if that's what you're thinking. We know that there was, if you Google it, slavery in the North was basically after 7 years, one state abolished slavery, and then 21 years later, they abolished it in every state in the North. You know what I mean? It only took 28 years to get rid of slavery. You know what I mean? So if you Google it and you say, well, in 1804 or the 1800s, who owned the slaves? Like, the white people. It'll say 25% of the South owned slaves, right? In the North, no one owned it. So if you extrapolate, you know what I mean? That's 25% of the white people in the South. But if you double the country and add in the North people too, then that means that percentage is diluted. So it has to go down. It goes in half. If you double the population, then the percentage of people who own slaves is now going to go down. So now only 25% of the South own slaves, but the whole country as a whole, only 12.5% of white people own slaves. Okay, 12.5%. Now what I'm saying is, even if we shut off the borders that day, we got rid of slavery, and that day we shut down the borders, we never accepted any more immigrants, no illegal aliens. We were shut off from everybody. The population today, mathematically, if everyone procreates at the same rate, and most groups procreate similarly, you know what I mean? So if we assume that they procreate at the same rate, that means the population today, 12.5% of the population today have descended from people who own slaves. And it doesn't matter if it was a day after, if it's 1,000 years from now, 100 years from now, tomorrow, whenever, if you don't let any immigrants come in and you stick with that, there's 30 million American citizens, in 1865 when they abolished slavery, 30 million. So 12% of those owned slaves. That means the descendants, you know, as the population grows overall, that percentage of people who owned slaves, you know, people who descended from owning slaves, that will grow. I mean, that will stay the same. You know what I mean? Because it will grow too. You know, the descendants of those people who own slaves will grow as the same rate as all the rest of the, you know, the other 87.5%. So no matter where you look in history, it will always be 12.5% of the population of the white people own slaves. Okay, no matter where you go, and that's if no immigrants came in. So that means today, even if no immigrants came in, and we were just have all the people in America was descended from people from slave times in America. Okay, only 12.5% of the entire country is descended from people who own slaves. That means if this was the country, it'd be like a little, just a, you know, it'd be like half of Florida or a small state like Virginia had slavery, and the rest of this country, you know, no other state had slavery, and half of Florida didn't have slavery. Only half of Florida had slavery. The rest of the country had, and we blame the whole country. Do you know how small that is? Only 12.5% of the country is even descended from slaves. Okay, now think of this now. Rich people don't procreate as much as poor people and middle class people, okay? So the elites who had these slaves, right, most likely they procreated at a slower rate than the rest of the population. So their ancestors are smaller than 12.5%. So let's just make up a number and have it be even, you know what I mean? Let's just say 10%, okay? Only 10% of people in the United States right now are descended from people, you know, during slave times that own a slave. That means 90%. I want you to sink that in. 90% of the population in the United States wasn't even, their ancestors weren't even, had nothing to do, they had no slaves ever, never had slaves, never, okay? Now, I want you, 10% had slaves, you know, if you take into the fact that rich people don't have kids as much, okay? So today, 10%. Now, you take into the fact that if half of the country didn't even, they came in as immigrants after slavery, they definitely didn't have anything to do with slavery. They weren't even here, you know what I mean? So if half the country is immigrants or whatever after slavery, that doubles the population. What do we do when you double the population? The percentage has to go down by half, right? So that means that only if half of the country is illegal, is immigrants, illegal or legal, either way, if half of them are that, and they came in after slavery, that means only 5% of people actually are descended from slaves. Only 5%. That means 95%. 95% of the country has nothing to do with it. Nothing. It's like saying that half of Florida had slaves and the rest of the country didn't have anything to do with it, and we blame the whole country. You know what I mean? 95%. And you might say, well, why do you even think that there's half the country isn't, you know, came in after slavery or whatever? I want you to think about it. There's 160 years since slavery, right, ended. So that's 16 decades, right? 16 decades. The first 5 decades after slavery, 15 million people, documented immigrants, came in. 15 million in the first 5 decades, okay? And keep in mind, if you do the census and look at it for 1865, for when they abolished slavery, the total total citizens in the United States was only about 30 million. Only 30 million. And in the next 5 decades, we let in 15 million. 15 million is half of 30 million. Right there, you've got a big increase, you know what I mean? And that is just the legal documented immigrants. You figure you wouldn't have Border Patrol back then, and we didn't have this other stuff checking for, you know, illegal aliens coming in on a boat that isn't documented. They just came over and unloaded or whatever. So you got 15 million. That doesn't count the people that there probably was, and we're talking about 5 decades, so 50 years. I'm saying there's probably another 5 million during that time that came in undocumented. It just came in over the southern border, the northern border, or just came in over. There was no port. You know what I mean? You figure this is back in the 1860s and 1870s. You didn't have IDs and stuff like that, and you didn't have a ship coming to port and there's cops there taking your passport and shit. You know what I mean? So 5 million is that's being very conservative, man. So if they let in 15 million plus another 5 million, that's 20 million people over the first 5 decades. And we only had 30 million to begin with. Okay? So yes, those 30 million did have kids, and they did have, they're increasing their population, but it's not as much as you think. Because let's say you have two 20-year-olds and they have 4 kids, right? At that time, those 4 babies, their great-grandparents, which would be 4 of them, okay, are going to die because they're old. Okay, so they cancel each other out. But of course, those great-grandparents had other children, and there's other lineages, going down to other kids or whatever. But again, you're bringing in another grandparent, because that kid has to marry someone, and now you have another great-grandparent. Okay, these kids canceled out the great-grandparents here, so the other kids from this lineage, they can't cancel that out. But they can cancel out the new great-grandparent. You know what I mean? And but anyways, and that number has gone up and up and up. You figure right after those 5 decades, you had World War I and then World War II, and the country was scared to death because we didn't have enough people, and we were afraid that we wouldn't be able to win wars. And when war comes, World War I in 1915 or whatever, and then World War II in 1940 or whatever, we were letting people in left and right, man. We had increased our things up big time, okay? And that trend has gone on for the whole time the country has existed. It's just gone higher and higher and higher. And I'll give you an example. The last 4 years, if we pretend this is January of next year, so that his first 4 years were done, he has let in 15 million people. Or no, he has let in 20 million people. And I want you to think about it. They admit that they let in 10 million people that are known gotaways and people that just illegal aliens, you know what I mean? That's 10 million, they admit. Now the gotaways would normally be like 2 million. But, the unknown gotaways, not known gotaways, the unknown gotaways, we would estimate it at 2 million, okay? But because Biden has this thing where you got 10,000 people coming in at one time and all Border Patrol goes focused on that area, and you have a 100% chance now for the cartels to get stuff in. Obviously, they're going to triple what they're getting in since now they have a 100% chance of not getting caught. So say they let in 6 million not known gotaways, right? Then you got 10 who were gotaways that were known and that, were documented. So that's 16 million right there. But you're not thinking about the 4 million that he lets in legally, because he lets in at least 1 million a year legally. So there's another 4 million, or at least 900,000 people, I bet. So that's 10 million plus 4 million plus 6 million, that's 20 million people. In the last 4 years, we've let in 20 million illegal aliens. And guess what? When we started, right after we abolished slavery, there was only 30 million people in the entire country. And yet, in the last 4 years, we've let in 20 million people, almost the entire population of what we started with. And you're saying half the country didn't come in after slavery? Then let's go back a decade before that, okay, before Biden, right? That decade included Trump and Obama, who were good on keeping